Thank you very much for joining us here. You're watching Business at 9 and I'm Nivedna. Prabhu. Let's put into focus our top story because heavy rainfall has disrupted life across Delhi NCR with severe waterlogging and massive traffic jams, especially in Gurugram, where a 7-kilometer long snarl was reported. You're looking at the visuals on your screens play out. Thousands of commuters in one of India's wealthiest suburbs were stuck on roads, not for 1, but to 6 to 8 hours due to rain-triggered traffic gridlock. The incident clearly has sparked outrage online, with many questioning how a place like Gurugram, known for its futuristic skyscrapers and sprawling corporate offices, could have such poor infrastructure. We put that question spotlight tonight's show. In fact, let me take the opportunity to be introducing my guest this evening, Suresh Kumar Rohila, former Senior Director, CSC. I'm also given to understand that Akhil Srivastava, Scientist IMD, will be joining us in a while from now. But Mr. Suresh, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us this evening on ET Now. Given what we're looking at in terms of these visuals, unfortunately, it's not the first time. To begin with, what do you really make of that? You know, this is crumbling infrastructure at its peak for an urban city.
Yes, I agree with you. For a financial city, where we are dependent on so much, economy is dependent, and it goes totally in chaos with these pictures. It's clearly evident that something needs to be done. But it also shows that there is apathy, that for a long time there's not much being done. So I think there is a clear case for that. There are certain missed opportunities which needs to be revisited. And I have had the opportunity to engage with this area. I have researched a lot for how water sensitive cities can be made. And I would talk to you about that, how potentially, there are missed opportunities in the case of Gurugram, where in other cases they were done better so that the situation can be improved.
As you say that, Mr. Suresh, of course, given the aspect of how this is just not the tale of Gurugram, and unfortunately, this is not the first time that we're looking at how this has happened. Other urban cities are also unfortunately looking at the same situation when it rains. But just to put that perspective, what we did see late last night, that this particular flooding is often dismissed as a drainage or infrastructure lapse as well. But from your lens, your vantage point of water-sensitive urban planning, what systematic failures does it reveal about the way Indian cities are designed and governed?
I think what is missing is that there is, because we know that whatever happens on the roads and whatever happens to our water bodies, because we are not having sensitivity towards water bodies and the catchment of the water bodies, and then we build upon those water bodies and the catchment of the water bodies. The water which is seen in on the roads is basically the water which was going somewhere. For example, there is a big lake in the Gurugram region called Najafgarh Jheel, which actually has been drained out in the form of Najafgarh drain, which outfalls into Yamuna. And there are several sectors in Gurugram which are constructed on the catchment on the lake, actually, if you see. The Najafgarh Jheel at one point of time was 80 square mile of water according to 1883 Gazette year. And in 1995-96, when I started documenting this and we mapped this, it was 5 square miles of water. But today you would see that sector, around 100, 105, all those have come up on the Jheel area. And this is one of the biggest example I'm saying. But every village had 1 or 2 village ponds, and 5 or 10 villages had one big lake area or a depression area. If you see in literal sense, Jheel in the monsoon countries and in northern India means a low-lying area, depression. And all the depression areas have been filled upon and built upon by the builders. But in monsoon area country, it is likely that you will always have dry season also, where the areas will have no water or less water. So that doesn't mean you should construct over that. You should have a sensitive urban design and planning. I think that is the need of the hour. And this has been left to the developers, private developers, who had no sensitivity towards this, but they were the external drainage was supposed to be developed by the municipal bodies or Haryana Urban Development Authority, which has not been able to deliver on that part. And for example, I would say that not everything can be captured by the drainage. Drainage is at least should be the last thing what goes out. First, you should try to see as much as possible, wherever possible, you should catch the rain, hold the stormwater. The more concretization which has happened over last 25 years in this Gurugram region has increased the runoff by many fold. And at the rapid pace, the water travels from the catchment area to the road area, and that is ultimately reflected. So what is reflected on the roads is what happens on the catchment areas of the roads. So the catchment areas are basically the
Mr.
residential
Suresh,
areas.
you're absolutely right. As you point that out, it's very easy to put it on that aspect, but there are multiple layers to what has really caused the ground reality that we're looking at. In fact, I'm going to come back to you while we further discuss that aspect as well. But I'm given to understand Akhil has also joined us on the show. Akhil, thank you for taking the time out and joining us this evening. Let me also ask you, given this spell of rain that choked Gurugram within hours, and that's essentially what, Suresh and I were also putting into context, that unfortunately this is not the first time we're looking at it, and moreover, when you compare it to urban cities also in the state of affairs. But just to talk about these immediate readings and what we're looking at unfold here, was this an unusually high intensity downpour or within expected monsoon variability as well? What made it so disruptive this time, if we were to look at it from that aspect?
See, actually, whenever we have seen that whenever the monsoon is in active condition, during those particular times, we see these kind of rainfall activities over northwest part of the country. So today also, and yesterday also, we see the condition, then there was a western disturbance in the northwest parts of the country, which is impacting northwest parts of the country. Monsoon trough is near about its normal position. And then when you've got some kind of additional cyclonic circulation, upper air cyclonic circulation, which is available over Haryana, and yesterday it was over northwest Rajasthan. So these are the conducive features which bring a lot of moisture to the northwest part of the country, and it provides a conducive environment, and such kind of moisture under favorable conditions gives a lot of convection activity and a lot of rainfall. Today morning at 8:30 hours CST in Gurugram, I think about 14 centimeter rainfall. That is a very heavy rainfall category as per IMD classification that was reported. Today also, I think good rainfall activity is going on. So these kind of impact what we are seeing, it is not very unusual, as we have already forecasted during the 31st of August press conference, that September is likely to see above normal rainfall activity in the month of September. That is about 109% of the long period average. So seeing that kind of outlook for the rainfall, this kind of excess rainfall activity is not unlikely.
All right. In fact, Akhil, as you point that out, I'm going to come back to really understand these kind of patterns that also we've been looking at. But Mr. Suresh, coming back to you and what we were initially putting into context, you have worked with governments and city agencies, and like you were also putting that into perspective. Where exactly does the institutional breakdown lie? Because it's fragmented mandates, lack of accountability, or, just the incapacity to really operationalize sustainable solutions. Because what's unfortunate is that time and again we're at this point discussing that. I'm sure there is a solution, like you did point out, but perhaps it's the lack of accountability sometimes.
I think it's multiple aspects the failure has been, and it has to be. It is a multidisciplinary issue also. It's not just to be left that to the engineers alone for a hardware approach that you could have 600 crore rupees and install some pumps which will pump the water, which is a curative and a reactive approach. Basically, the urban design and planning has to look into that 25 years and 50 years ahead, that how cities have to be adapting to the climate change and other things. So what I see is that, it's not, as I agree with Mr. Srivastava, that, it's not very unusual. There is new data sets which are clearly showing that 1,000 cities have been studied where it is clearly coming out that, where there is more urban heat, there is going to be likely more rainfall also. And the high intensity of rainfall will be there. But there has been no preventive measures being taken that this should not happen again and again. In a sense that, the catchments have to be prepared for this, or the water bodies have to be prepared. And also these things are interlinked with, along with solid waste management also. Like if solid waste is also blocking the drainage channels, that work also doesn't happen. Or if desilting of the drains also, that doesn't happen on time. It is the civic apathy, I would say, civic incompetence and the failure of the urban design and planning, where you could possibly trap a lot of monsoon water at different stages at your individual household level, to where you can do rainwater harvesting, to neighborhood level where you have lakes, ponds, where you could utilize your open areas which are parks and spaces. For example, I did a study where I found that Delhi has around 17,000 parks, for example. Similarly, I'm sure Gurgaon has several hundred parks, and there are several hundred square kilometer area under parks and open spaces. But there has been no innovation in design to capture the storm water, which can reduce the fraction of the rainfall, which ultimately leads to the roads, and which we are going to pump out through hardware and electricity usage and diesel, which will be used. So it's a total reactive and curative approach, but there is no preventive approach, no long-term approach which is being followed at the moment. It's only a piecemeal approach. I'll stop here.
Right, Suresh, but like you point that out, I'm going to, of course, try and come back to you quickly again to decode the other aspects. But Akhil, coming to you, given what Mr. Suresh was also pointing out, this is a multi-layered approach that one needs to also have to get a solution. But I want to understand from you, from the climate perspective, should Gurugram for this particular season brace for more rainfall overall, or for the same rainfall compressed into fewer, more intense episodes? What is the bigger risk that we're foreseeing?
See, there have been several studies also, which are done by different research organizations within IMD and also outside IMD. Also, a lot of organizations have done. There is a very interesting study also by one of the MOES centers, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, which has talked about the they have framed a word called as a mini cloudburst, which talks about a rainfall activity of 5 centimeters in an hour. And they've talked about that this kind of activity is increasing. The trend of this kind of activity over India is increasing. So these short spells and with intense rainfall activity, they are now being seen more. And this is also likely found in the research activities or research results also. So this is, of course, a major challenge nowadays, because a lot of high intense rainfall activity has been seen. Also, when it increases a particular threshold, we call them as a cloudburst also. Although, even if it's not a cloudburst, even a high intense rainfall activity in a very small amount of time in an urban setup can create a lot of problems for the people over there.
In fact, you put that well into perspective, and I'm sure, Mr. Suresh, you're also going to agree that, citizens just are not facing these traffic snarls, right? But they're also heavy human costs. There's health, there's productivity, and of course, in the larger scheme of things, what we're looking at here, how should government start valuing and integrating these costs into urban planning, Mr. Suresh?
One example is, if you really compare two cities in the NCR, Noida as compared to Gurgaon, you can see the difference, where the city planning was done within the public sector, but over here, private sector was given a free hand in Gurgaon. You would see very less such instances of, flooding in Noida. Not that Noida has done too much of water sensitive planning, but they have actually designed for handling certain amounts of drainage issues. So I think that is one good example I can say. I've also done a detailed feasibility study that how further rainwater harvesting could have been done in Noida, such that Noida could even avoid whatever little is happening. Certainly in case of Gurgaon, even that is not there. It was left a free hand to the private developers, and they were not sensitive to water sensitive design and planning. So that is certainly a good example I can say. So there are examples, for example, in Chennai, I know recently there has been a sponge park which has been developed, MS Swaminathan's Sponge Park, which is around 20 plus hectare area, which is going to capture huge rainfall. So some good examples are there which can show the way to us.
Absolutely. And in fact, those are imperative points. But on that note, I want to thank you, Mr. Suresh, as well as Akhil, for taking the time out and joining us here. More importantly, the lessons that we're taking away, hopefully, the ones who have to put that into action will do. And once again, we won't be seeing citizens at the end of that particular situation. Having said that, we leave it at that. We're shifting our focus quickly to big news that we're tracking as far as the numbers of the S&P 500 is concerned. In fact, let's tell you, it fell 1.4% just after the opening bell, while the Nasdaq in fact dropped 1.8%. So just putting that into perspective quickly, for S&P 500 that fell 1.4%. This is just after the opening bell. You're looking at the numbers on your screens. As far as Dow Jones is concerned, has also opened in the red, currently trading levels at 45,036. You're looking at the points change of minus 508.46 at the moment, and percentage of minus 1.12. So downtick as well. Let's tell you, the Dow Jones Industrial Average also slid 560 points. Like, I just put that into perspective. So those numbers over there, looking at it. So US investors returned from the Labor Day break to fresh trade uncertainty, which is clearly reflective and indicative in those numbers after a federal appeals court ruled most of Donald Trump's tariffs illegal, though it allowed them to remain until October 14 to give them for a possible Supreme Court appeal. So all in all, those are the big key takeaways as far as the numbers are concerned, with the S&P 500 reaching the session low as well. But while we decode that, we're slipping into a quick break here on Business at 9. But given the aspect of what we were talking about earlier of the crumbling infrastructure, and after the break, we tell you more on that, because author and entrepreneur Suhail Saif has launched a sharp attack on the government over Gurugram's crumbling infrastructure. Taking to social media platform X on a rain-lashed day, he said Gurugram is done, while also blaming former Chief Minister Manohar Lal Khattar for ruining the city and accusing the current CM Nayak Singh Saini of being unable to manage the situation. You're looking at some of those points of his social media take that he did put out. Now, Said also said that after ruling Haryana for 11 years, the BJP can't pass the buck on to Nehru. So to take the viewers a little back, this isn't really his first swipe. He's repeatedly criticized the state's political leadership for ignoring Gurugram's urban mess that we just put into context. But what exactly did Suhail Saif say on this matter? I had the opportunity to speak with him a little while ago. So listen into that slice of this chat. I'll leave you with that. And on that note, thank you very much for joining us here on this edition.